When God had told me He was taking us through a time that would be like an amusement park for a child, I started to think about my favorite park growing up. It had a roller coaster that was really bumpy called the Twister, and it would take the riders upside down and then back right up several times while moving super fast and then plummeting with a sudden drop more than once. When falling into the drop, it felt like the end of my life, and I would close my eyes and grip the handlebars tight. But then when you reach the bottom, it would fill my tummy with delightful butterflies and excitement, because what seemed so dreadful turned out to be so much fun. It was a brief time of a feeling of a life-threatening adrenaline rush, all while feeling safe and protected. It was scary when in motion, because you never know when the ride will turn you upside down next, or plummet like a speeding bullet towards the ground. I would hold my breath at times because I didn't know when the ride would end. And when it went upside down, I was scared that I would fall out. Once the ride started, there was no other choice but to be carried all the way through. It seemed all too soon when the ride would come to a smooth end. I would feel so full of joy and awe that I would run back to the line and ride the same roller coaster again and again. There were so many emotions, some very bad and some very good. At times it wasn't fun, but it was terribly scary. But once I made it to the end and I realized there was nothing to fear, the joy of the ride made up for any moment of discomfort and fear. Just like the roller coaster I remembered, the ride that God last took us through with this journey started out with a long, slow ascent up a steep incline. During that time, the fear and anticipation and pressure of what would happen to us was the very worst part. If it was a ride, I wanted off, to be honest. We were still at the Airbnb high-rise apartment in downtown Chicago. Because we had stayed more than a month, my fees for the room were broken into payments. What I didn't realize was that there was one last payment of $1,002. Once I discovered there was one more payment left on our stay, I was praying that God would rescue us and cover that payment. Then the Lord took me into an encounter with Him. He showed me a towering apartment building, and there were 2 leaves. He continued to promise me that He would cover the undercover, meaning the past payment, and the overcover, the next place where we would stay. I was comforted instantly, but what I didn't realize was my timing was not God's timing. The missing payment was a great place of fear for me, because I was afraid we would be kicked onto the streets if we didn't pay in time. There were many dangers of what-ifs of what could be done, including a criminal offense or even losing my Airbnb account. It was like I suddenly stepped into a real-life twister where the strong, tumultuous winds of fear were screaming of all the bad outcomes that could be done. Day after day, the Airbnb app would attempt to charge my card, and it sent me into a whirlwind of panic because it was declined every time. At times, it felt like I was spiraling with fear when I thought about our delicate situation and how my child needed someone to care for her, so I couldn't be in trouble. Yet God would meet me every night and assure me of His promises. He said the opposite of my fears would be done, and He gave me very detailed promises of exact financial amounts of what He would send. He encouraged me to make my prayers like a child making a wish list, and then He promised that He would rescue everything on my wish list with His promise. During our intimate times, the Lord also promised to make up for the attack with added blessings. He said He would set a standard of what I can expect from Him through this by giving us extra blessings. When the enemy comes in like a flood, the Lord will lift up a standard against him. On top of all the other life and death dangers we were facing of being on the streets in the 90-degree heat, there was a massive attack against me and those that God had connected to seeing the promises fulfilled. At first, the fears were so intense that I was unable to let go. God had made one very specific promise to me, and it was stolen by enemy hands because I was holding on to fear and not trusting God. Because the promises of God do not prosper when mixed with unbelief, we have to let the fears go. But then God gave me a promise to restore my promise with even more. The next wave of panic came when my key to the apartment stopped working. I was so terrified to ask for a new key because of my outstanding balance. Before I approached the front desk, I prayed to God and asked that they let me have a key without a second thought. I was crying thankfulness in the elevator when that is exactly what God caused to happen. The building replaced my keys 2 times during that last week of our stay when I failed to pay my room scheduled payment. Any other Airbnb would have thrown us out immediately, but God kept us hidden from watchful eyes and the building never noticed. They never noticed we were in debt. We weren't safe because of the absence of dangers, but because of the presence of God. The entire week was a constant battle of wrestling between promise and fear. There was also another test that God gave me in that week of immense pressure. Someone had offered me the amount of money that God promised to give me, but this person was requiring that I accept certain terms and conditions. However, the Lord told me not to touch it and to trust Him to send the promise that was a gift from Him with no strings attached. A promise is a gift of unconditional love, but it also goes through the fire of refining where our faith is tested to turn out as gold. It took all my strength to decline the offer and to follow the integrity of obeying God with my whole heart. Everything I'd ever believed was being tested by contrast. It was overwhelming. One of the other prayers that I had made to God was that I wouldn't be humiliated by not paying the money in time. I had asked God to show up before the Airbnb company confronted me for the money. My life and my child's life felt like it was on the line, and yet God was giving me promises after promises of what He would do. One night during that week, God gave me a vision of a receipt proving that His promise was certain, and then God said, "Let go." When I released the last recording called "I Let Go," it was a song of a very raw soul. I had finally come to the place where I accepted God's promise over my own fears of getting hurt. I chose to let go of my fears, and that includes all the worries, and to trust God, even in the midst of our own survival. It was the most intense moment of letting go of my fears I've ever known. I chose at that moment to lay my heart on the altar of God, open and believing in what He promised. I died to my fears, and I finally let go of them. I recorded the moment of letting go while fighting back tears. It was the deepest surrender, deeper than I can put into words. I felt an instant relief at the end of it, like a weight had been lifted, even though nothing changed in my situation. I felt like Hannah, with agonizing, lamenting cries and sobs before the Lord. And then after she released her agony, she got up and cheerfully went to eat, knowing that her promise was fulfilled. The morning of checkout came and I had nothing, no money to go anywhere, and I still owed the $1,000 payment. It didn't go as I expected, but I had peace to trust that God was with us and that He would move at just the right time. And just like I prayed, there was no humiliation. God hid the missing payment even after we left. We left the Airbnb downtown, and God directed me to drive to the suburbs, so we took the long drive back to the nature-filled suburban town. There was a pause, like when a roller coaster comes to the bottom of a sudden drop. We sat in the car, waiting on God to rescue us like He promised. But oddly enough, there was no fear, only peace and trust. It was a moment that seemed so quiet when God did the unbelievable for us. He showed up with a fulfilled promise that was 5 times more than what He had said before the attack. And then He told me to pay the 1002 bill for the last room, and He protected us just like He promised to. From sitting in the car with absolutely nothing but trust in His promise to show up, God took us to one of our favorite hotels where we were given immense comfort and soul nourishment. At times I did not love the ride because it was so scary, but after experiencing God's love in action as our ever-present rescue, I love being so protected and cared for. I felt like Moses hidden in the midst of crocodiles during the roller coaster of this rescue. God protected us from all the dangers along the riverbank, and not one single fear was permitted to harm us. The lesson that I had to learn through this experience was the power of letting go of my fears and doubts. I had to come to the very end of myself in order to truly, honestly, and fully let go. When you've been holding on to something so tight for a very long time, letting go is not easy. We often have to stretch out our hands open and shake the thing we are holding on to so tightly free. It is a powerful release that opens the door to phenomenal blessings. Holding on to worry is fear in action, but resting in God's promise with total confidence and His timing is one of the most powerful acts of faith that can be done. Less is more. If God had told me we were going to go through this before this time, I would have never went on the ride because of the fear of it. I would have never taken the risk. However, it was the ride that set me free from the lies of danger. And I was able to feel the embrace of being hugged by God's loving promise in a way that touched my heart to the core with comfort. It made me stronger. After we finally landed in the hotel room, I felt like a child who came home after a day at the amusement park. I was still high on the excitement of all God did, and my heart was soaring with so much love and gratitude from encountering God as my true love hero. I could still hear the uplifting music of the rides, and I remembered how the park glittered with lights in the evening when the sky was dark. The sweet aroma of cotton candy lingered in my memory, and I couldn't stop smiling. This was more than a ride. It was an encounter that changed me forever. I love you. This is Dannette from diamondsfromthedust.com.